Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Napoleon Juanillo, and I'm from the Commission on Higher Education. I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, our friends from media, Rizal Raul Reyes. Hi, sir, how are you? Joyce Bolasco. I'm sorry. Balan, Balancho. Ann Barcelo. Hi, how are you? Chris Crismundo. And Janvic Mateo. Yeah, hi. Jorik, Joriki, Jovic, sorry. Angelo Samonte. Angelo Samonte, yeah. Yeah, so I'll just give you a briefer as to what happened in the last 2 days. August 13 and 14, 2015 was an eventful 2 days for the Commission on Higher Education and the Department of Science and Technology because we hosted the first APEC high-level policy dialogue on science and technology in higher education. I guess a lot of you are kind of wondering what is the takeaway for the host economy, the Philippines, in proposing, in fact, to host the first high-level policy dialogue on science and technology in higher education. Well, there are, I think, three ways of just looking at the benefits of hosting this event. Number one, we all know that it's the 21st century, and in a knowledge based economy, there's no other way for a country, I guess, to move forward but to really capitalize on science and technology. Meaning to say that science and technology are great platforms for generating new knowledge, and because in the 21st century knowledge age, knowledge is the currency, and hence I think it's rather important that we all recognize it and that we as a nation really get to have an appreciation for what it is to participate in this kind of an ecosystem. I think a lot of you are wondering also whether there are, well, I'm sorry, let me just rephrase that. I think a lot of you are, of course, wondering whether this is good for jobs, whether this is something that is good for the economy. And let me just put in context what this is all about. Well, science and technology are supposed to be generators of jobs. I think anybody who tries to engage himself or herself seriously and in all earnestness in the discipline of science can attest to the fact na pagkatapos ninyong uh, mag-immerse sa science, I cannot ever imagine any person not having, just like you know, very well dedicated and hardworking journalist, not having anything to do after devoting your passion to something. Well, in a sense, I think it is rather always, I should say, how do I put it? A miscontextualization to keep on asking whether there will be jobs for you after chemistry, after physics, after astronomy, after meteorology, after all of this, because in the end, you know, I think that very discipline actually enables you to generate a job for yourself. In other words, you can actually be a job creator, you can actually employ yourself. The very discipline actually allows you to be very independent, to be very passionate about anything that you want to do, and in a sense, to be very entrepreneurial. And so, our hosting of this high-level policy dialogue reinforces among our higher education institution presidents and leaders the need to inculcate among our young the passion and I should say the love for courses in science and technology. But nonetheless, let me even dig into it and say that it's more than science and technology. It's really having a love and passion for anything that you really want to know about, that you want to dig an interest in. Whether that interest is in science and technology, whether that interest is in journalism, whether that interest is in the arts, whether that's interest in the humanities, it doesn't matter. I think the bottom line that we're trying to develop in this kind of conversations is that um, let's cultivate a deeper passion, and I should say a deeper interest, not just something fleeting, not just something superficial, but really to be persistent in almost anything that we want to develop an interest in. So, but why science and technology? Because we believe also that there are so many benefits to the innovations that are out there right now, and those benefits are not just confined to any economy. That is the reason why there are five platforms in this dialogue that we talked about. The first platform is food production and security. And when we talk about food production and security, we cannot just be confining it to the innovations, let's say, generated by Japan or by the United States. We certainly are looking into a way for all the scientists and experts in all the 21 economies to share their innovations, to share what they know. And so knowledge sharing is a big takeaway in this conference, and that's exactly what we tried to talk about in the last 2 days. Exactly what kind of mechanisms, productive, functioning mechanisms, can we create so that indeed, you know, all of us can actually participate in the knowledge sharing and in the knowledge creation process. I talked about food production, but we also talked about disaster preparedness, disaster risk reduction, climate change, and energy issues. We also talk about marine economy, biodiversity and conservation. We did talk about big data analytics and engineering innovation, which seems to be the new science of, not necessarily, I'm sorry, maybe not the new science, but not the next big thing in science and technology. Um, and also we talked about health systems. Health systems, because we do believe that as we face all of these natural disasters and changes in the environment, there are new things that we confront in relation to our lifestyles, in relation to, let's say, diseases that are probably born out of these disasters and changes in climate. And so it was a very purposeful conversation. It wasn't at all an ivory towerish kind of conversation. And we believe that the Philippines, because we invited the presidents of our higher education institutions, most of the state universities and colleges presidents were present, and so were their vice chancellors or vice presidents for research. We also had representatives from private higher educational institutions, and as well as our partners from the industry. And so and so I think the idea really is that there are a lot of economic benefits from talking about uh, innovation, from looking at ways to encourage our citizens to engage in um, in that so-called innovation ecosystem. Meaning, and to engage in that ecosystem is, of course, cultivating a love for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And if you don't have that love for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, then at least direct your love for the humanities towards supporting science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So, ang maganda rin dun sa mga napag-usapan is that indeed some of the representatives were also saying, is it to the exclusion of other professions? Is it to the exclusion of others who may not have that kind of focused interest in STEM? And I think it was a rather inclusive and welcoming atmosphere when some were contending that indeed those who are in the literature or in history or in the arts or in the creative design can very well collaborate and work with engineers, with other scientists, and with other experts. In fact, if I may just highlight one of the papers that was presented today, and it was presented by Chairperson Likwanan. She was talking about who is the engineer of the future, who is the scientist of the future. And she was saying that the scientist of the future is not just someone who's technically competent, let's say in engineering and technology. Of course, we're already kind of assuming that that's the premise, that if you are an engineer, number one, you have to be disciplinarily solid in the field. But on the other hand, we're also saying that the engineer of the future is someone who can take a look at a problem from multidimensional angles, from multidisciplinary angles, and so therefore should be able to consider the thoughts of others, should be able to consider the solutions being proffered by those who are coming from other types of disciplines. The engineer of the future is also somebody who is creative, who is adaptable, who is flexible, and is not just confined to his or her own ideas, let's say about engineering or technology. The engineer of the future should be a team worker, should be able to work with others, should be able to understand the culture of others, of communities, of families and individuals. The technologist and engineer of the future is also a leader who is able to essentially convince or persuade others that this is probably the direction that one should take in solving a problem. And most importantly, the engineer of the future, and for many of you who are in the journalism world, is being emphasized as somebody who's able to communicate. Because what's the use of having technical competence if you are unable to get the message across, position the message, or even package the whole idea? And so now we're talking about science and technology as getting another layer of dimension than the usual, talk that we used to associate with science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And that's the beauty of it. And I think it all goes back now to the whole message of the two-day conference, which is building partnerships. So let's build partnerships with our 21, I should say, other partner economies. Let's build partnerships in terms of research collaborations, student exchanges, twinning programs in masters and PhDs, and I should say exchanges of experts as well on projects that matter to us, particularly in those 5 platforms that are probably articulated in your handouts. And so I think that's how I would just like to contextualize what happened in the last 2 days. Please do not forget the word partnership, because partnership is good for regional economic cooperation. Partnership is good for regional growth that is sustainable and inclusive. And partnership is a good scaffolding for us as a nation I think to start cultivating a value for, and I think that's the operative word of the past 2 days. So if that's one way to kind of humanize the presence of all of these really great scientists and experts who were with us in the Philippines for the past 2 days, I think that's just my way of conveying that conference to you. For any further clarifications and questions, I now open the floor to questions you may have.
Magandang hapon, Dr. Nab. I am Arnie Barcelo, a professor from University of Santo Tomas.
Wonderful.
I, and also we have our radio program sa Radio Enquirer. It's about technology, and we have been supporting the startup ecosystem for
Right.
almost 3 years. Ayan po, sabi nyo nga, the science and technology is the new sexy.
That's
Ayan,
right.
so, but I think now the problem is, or the challenge is, how we are going to translate it sa totoong mundo in the classroom, yung the joint the joint statement is so promising. Actually, it's a wonderful message to all. It is what we are waiting for. Kaya from the academic side, we are very happy to hear that statement or the output of this APEC high-level policy dialogue on SNT. So, are we planning, what is our plan in supporting the teachers in the challenge of translating this to our students? And do we have the venue or innovation hub so that we can empower our teachers to make this possible? That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, well, as a professor talking to another professor, you know, you and I know very well that the most elemental innovation hub is actually that the heart and mind of that individual student. We really just have to start with changing the mindset. What are some of the things that I can just tell you about? Number one, the mindset that science can be fun. Second, the mindset that no matter what you do, there will always be errors that one will commit in doing science, and that trial and error is just part of the whole business, which is great because trial and error is part of the whole business of life anyway. And so that if that is the mindset that we cultivate in that young scientist, in that young mind, and I'm not even talking about a college age kid, I'm just really saying that if that is the mindset that one is free to make mistakes and that one is free to learn from those mistakes, and you know that, and that one is free to get affirmation that those mistakes are indeed mistakes, affirmation from others in the group, then I think that's also the start of entrepreneurship. You were talking about startups, and the startups is all about, you know, meeting bumps here and there, and that those bumps are for real. You know, you cannot take them away. They will always be there. As they say, and as a businessman myself, I must say, errors and bumps are permanent white waters of life. You know, it's almost like you're water rafting. You will never cease in encountering bumps. It's just what it is. So we might as well recognize life na ganun na nga yan. You know, I think even the most successful entrepreneur anyway, that the biggest takeaway that he or she can relate to us is that it is a reality of life. And so I say that the site, the biggest incubator site is really the hearts and minds. And I think to the extent that, and I'm pretty sure that you're doing it in your classroom, you probably talk about now about blended learning, project-based learning, problem-based learning, when you just really try to problematize a phenomenon and allow a group or even a dyad to just share thoughts about ways of analyzing it. And I think that's the bigger start. You know, sometimes I do not believe that resources aren't out there. And I think if one has the passion to do something, no matter what the barriers are, you know, you will find the resources. Sometimes those resources may not be as much as you expected, but they do add up anyway. And I think, and those are some of the little, I should say, ABCs, so to speak, that we probably have to impart to our students. Institutions like government certainly has a role to play. But then again, even if government has some resources, let's say for research and development, those resources are for nothing if one who participates in that enterprise doesn't have the persistence and the mindset to do it well. You know, so it's still possible that you might fail even if you, let's say, have $1 million grant. So, but then again, there are those who would succeed even with just, you know, not as much as resources that we're talking about. And we see that even in larger economies. We do say that an economy that has invested a lot in R&D the outcomes and the outputs may not be as significant compared to an economy that has this much only, and yet the output or the outcome, let's say in terms of publications or patents, are much, much more significant, both in terms of quality and quantity. And so I think that's the that's the best advice. And I think the good thing about this high-level policy dialogue is that that joint statement, my friends, also drives up internal reforms in science and technology in the Philippines. And that's one way to look at it. You know, because we've kind of, because we want to ride this bus or take this train, therefore we might as well be, I should say, be ready to ensure that we can move as fast. I mean, just because we want to use the track, we might as well have a train that can move as fast. So that's my answer to that. I hope that satisfies you. But it's really a battle of the mind, and in the end, that's all that matters. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Jan Vic from Philippine Star.
Yes, sir, Jen.
The policy dialogue focused on science and technology. Has there been discussions on the possibility of conducting dialogues that will focus on perhaps other sectors or other sectors in higher education, for instance, liberal arts or pedagogy, or perhaps discussions on higher education in itself between the member economies instead of just focusing on science and technology? And probably in connection with that, maybe you can talk about why did we focus on science and technology in this particular high-level policy dialogue.
Yeah, thanks for that question. As I've stressed, this is the first high-level policy dialogue on science and technology in higher education. But the beauty of this dialogue is that it spilled over to something else. You know, so in other words, the very question that you're asking was also asked. You know, why just concentrate on this when the new economy, the knowledge-based economy, is not just about science and technology, it's about the contributions of the humanities, it's a contribution of history, it's a contribution of literature, of creative design, and all other types of disciplines, so that indeed the very outcome that we seek, which is an innovation, is a product of all of these great minds. And so the answer to that, John Vic, is that while the starting point was science and technology, it has evolved to 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 a point where we're saying the prism by which to look at any problem, for that matter, has to involve all of these other disciplines. You know, so the wisdom of the historian, the wisdom of the storyteller, the wisdom of the creative artist, the contributions of the writers, and the many talents are part of the whole ecosystem, and they're part and parcel of, I should say, producing an innovation. And I think that should be very reassuring, right? And I think that indeed is much more healthy, and I think that's exactly where we should lead our, I should say, classroom environments to. So, but as I've said, you know, the more we cultivate this multi-angled thinking among our young, the better it's gonna be for the production and build-up of innovations. Is that okay? Yeah. Are you okay? Baka mamaya mag-lecture na ako dito. So I think we'll leave it at that. And okay, uh, uh, okay, we're closing. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.